The city always seemed to exhale when he stepped into it at night, as if the streets themselves understood who ruled their shadows. Cars parted for his convoy without horns or hesitation. Pedestrians stepped back instinctively, sensing the gravity around the black sedan long before they recognized the face behind the tinted glass. He sat in the rear seat with one hand resting on his knee, the other loosely holding a phone he had not looked at in 10 minutes. He did not need to check messages. Every important decision had already been made. Every rival who mattered had already folded, fled, or disappeared into quiet graves no one would ever find. 3 hours earlier, he had signed the final agreement that sealed the consolidation. Not a corporate contract, not a handshake between polite businessmen, but a cold rearrangement of power written in fear and sealed in silence. The city's underground economy now moved to the rhythm of his breathing. Gambling routes, port access, security rackets, discrete logistics chains that touched 3 continents, all of it funneled through his network. He had not raised his voice once during the negotiations. He had not needed to. When he spoke, men listened the way soldiers listen to incoming artillery. The car stopped in front of the restaurant, a glittering monument of glass and gold that pretended to be about cuisine while laundering money at a rate that would have made governments jealous. The driver opened the door. He stepped out, adjusting the sleeve of his tailored suit with a small, precise motion. The fabric was perfect, the cut sharp enough to look like it could slice air. He wore elegance like armor. The doorman straightened so fast it was almost a salute. Conversations inside the foyer dimmed the moment he crossed the threshold. It was not dramatic, it was instinctive. People felt the temperature change. He moved through the dining room like a controlled storm, quiet and devastating. Waiters aligned themselves along his path without being told. The manager appeared with a smile stretched too wide, bowing his head just enough to show respect without humiliating himself. The boss acknowledged him with a slight nod. That was all. He did not need theatrics. Authority radiated from him in a steady, invisible pressure that pushed everything else outward. Externally, he was absolute dominance given human shape, a man who owned outcomes, a man who decided which futures survived and which did not. Internally, there was nothing but a sterile echo. Victory tasted like clean glass. He registered the success of the consolidation the way a doctor registers a completed procedure, efficient, necessary, emotionally neutral. This was the life he had chosen. Precision over chaos. Power over vulnerability. Untouchable. He sat at his private table overlooking the city lights, a throne disguised as furniture. Wine appeared without him ordering it. A plate was set. The skyline stretched beyond the window, glittering like a promise he had already collected. Years ago he would have felt something here. Pride, satisfaction, triumph. Now there was only a calm so deep it bordered on emptiness. He told himself this was maturity. This was what winning looked like after the illusions burned away. He had sacrificed distractions to get here. He repeated that fact to himself the way priests repeat prayer. Love was a distraction. Attachment was a weakness enemies exploited. He had learned that lesson brutally and early. 3 years ago he had cut the last vulnerability out of his life with surgical precision. He did not frame it as heartbreak. He framed it as strategy, a necessary severing, a clean line drawn between the man he had been and the man he had to become. He told himself she had been weakness. The memory tried to surface anyway. A voice, a face, a pair of eyes that once looked at him like he was not a weapon but a man. He pushed it down instantly. His jaw tightened for half a second before smoothing again. He reached for his glass and drank, letting the cold liquid anchor him in the present. Names had power. Thinking her name felt like opening a door he had welded shut. He avoided it the way soldiers avoid stepping on landmines they know are buried somewhere under their feet. Around him, the restaurant resumed its quiet hum, but it never fully recovered from his arrival. Every laugh was softer. every movement more careful. The world bent slightly in his direction and stayed there. He should have felt satisfied. He should have felt invincible. Instead, there was a silence inside him that no amount of power could fill. He looked out over the city that now belonged to him in every way that mattered. He had conquered it piece by piece, traded sleep for leverage, traded tenderness for control. Untouchable, he reminded himself. That was the goal. Untouchable men survived. He lifted the glass again, watching the lights blur through the liquid. For a fleeting, dangerous second, he wondered what it would feel like to be touched anyway. Then he crushed the thought before it could finish forming. Weakness had a scent, and he refused to carry it. He did not think her name. The night belonged to him. The city breathed for him. And somewhere beneath the tailored suit and the perfectly controlled posture, a man sat alone at a table built from victory, surrounded by everything he had fought to own, listening to the hollow echo of a life that no longer knew how to feel. The waitress appears at his table without sound, and for a moment he does not look at her because men like him are served by shadows every night, and shadows do not deserve attention. He reaches for his glass expecting the ritual to continue uninterrupted, but something in the air changes. A disturbance he feels in his bones before his eyes confirm it. And when he finally lifts his gaze, the world stops with a violence no bullet has ever delivered. The woman standing in front of him is not a stranger. Not a servant, not a passing face. She is the past he buried alive, and the shock hits him so hard his fingers loosen and the glass slips, crystal shattering against marble with a sharp sound that seems to echo forever. Conversations nearby fade into a distant murmur, and all he can see is her. The uniform too large on her shoulders, the cheap fabric unable to hide the curve of her stomach, unmistakable, heavy with life. And his chest tightens as if an invisible hand has reached inside and closed around his heart. She does not smile, she does not flinch. She looks at him with a calm that terrifies him more than anger. Her eyes are older, carved by sleepless nights and silent endurance, and she speaks his title like any other customer. "Sir, would you like me to open the bottle?" Her voice steady but thin at the edges, and he cannot answer because the words are trapped behind a wall of disbelief. This cannot be her. She was supposed to disappear into memory, into a clean past he sealed shut. Yet here she stands carrying another man's child inside his territory, inside a building that launders his sins, and the humiliation of it burns through him. Not humiliation for her but for himself, because he sees what exile did to her, the faint swelling in her ankles, the way her hand drifts to her back for a fraction of a second before she forces it still, the instinctive shield over her belly. She is protecting something fragile in a world he knows devours the unprotected, and the realization hits him with brutal clarity. She has no shield, no name, no armor. He stripped it away. A memory flashes of the night he signed the papers and called it strategy, called it necessity, called it survival, and now survival stands in front of him wearing an apron and exhaustion. He wants to say her name, but fear stops him because speaking it would make this real. Would crack open the silence he built inside himself. She bends to collect the broken glass with practiced efficiency, and he sees her hands tremble just once before control returns. She is pretending he is nothing, pretending he is a stranger, and that hurts in a way gunfire never has. A man at the next table laughs too loudly, and the sound feels obscene. How can the world continue while this moment holds him hostage? He leans forward, finally finding his voice, and it comes out raw, "Wait." And her eyes flick to his for a heartbeat, panic flashing there before she buries it beneath professional calm. "Sir, please, not here." And that plea is a blade, because it tells him everything. She is afraid of losing this job, afraid of drawing attention, afraid of him, the most feared man in the city, and once the only place she felt safe. And the weight of that truth settles on his shoulders heavier than any empire. He watches her step back into the rhythm of the restaurant, carrying the bottle to another table. smiling a borrowed smile, and he sits frozen among luxury and power, while the woman he exiled serves strangers with another man's child beneath her heart. And for the first time since he conquered the city, he feels something stronger than dominance, stronger than victory, a rising storm of guilt and fury, and a terrifying need to understand how the past he killed learned to breathe again right in front of him. He does not remember standing, but suddenly he is moving and the restaurant shrinks behind him as if it never existed. The doors swing open and cold night air slams into his lungs. He follows her shadow down a narrow corridor that smells of grease and old smoke. The glamorous music from the dining room dies into a distant pulse, and the real world takes its place: harsh fluorescent light, cracked tiles, the hum of refrigeration units. And at the end of the corridor she is there, gripping the metal door that leads outside as if it is the only thing holding her upright. She turns when she hears him, and the look in her eyes is not surprise but resignation, as if she knew this moment would come and prayed it would not. "You should not be back here," she whispers, and her voice carries a tremor she cannot fully hide. "This is employee space. You are not supposed to see this part of the building." And he understands she is not talking about the corridor. She is talking about her life, about the world she rebuilt without him, about the cracks and stains she does not want him walking through. He steps closer anyway and pushes the door open, and the alley greets them with damp concrete and the distant howl of traffic. The city sounds different here, stripped of glamour, stripped of illusion, just breath and survival. She leans against the brick wall, and for the first time he sees how hard it is for her to stand. Her hand slides to her lower back, fingers digging in as if to anchor herself against pain, and instinct overrides pride. He reaches for her, but she flinches back, and that small movement slices deeper than any knife. "Do not touch me," she says quietly, not angry, just tired. And he stops as if a wall rose between them. "I did not know," he begins, but the words feel stupid the moment they leave his mouth. Of course he did not know. He chose not to know. He erased her and called it strength. She laughs without humor, and the sound is hollow. "You were not supposed to know anything about me, remember? You made that very clear." Her eyes meet his, and they are no longer pleading eyes from the past. They are hard-earned eyes, eyes that learned how to survive disappointment. "You told me problems were not yours anymore. You told me to live with the consequences of leaving." And the memory hits him with brutal precision, his own voice from years ago echoing in the alley like a verdict. He feels something crack inside his chest. "I thought you would be safe," he says weakly, and she shakes her head slowly. "Safe is a luxury for women who have protection. You took mine away." The baby shifts inside her and she winces, and the movement is so intimate it feels like an accusation. He stares at her stomach, and the reality of it becomes unbearable. Someone hurt her and left her carrying proof of it. Someone walked away and she kept walking anyway. Who did this, he asks, and his voice is low now, dangerous. Not to her, but to the invisible man attached to that child. She lifts her chin, and there is pride in the gesture. "No one did this to me. I chose to love someone and he chose to lie. That is all. Do not turn my mistakes into your war." The alley falls silent except for their breathing. He realizes she is protecting the father not out of love but out of exhaustion. She is tired of being a battlefield, tired of men deciding her fate. The door behind them creaks and voices echo from the kitchen and panic flashes across her face. "Please," she whispers. "If they think I am causing trouble, I will lose this job. I cannot lose this job." And that is the moment that crushes him completely. The most feared man in the city stands in a filthy alley begging a pregnant woman he exiled to trust him, while she begs him not to ruin the one fragile thread keeping her afloat. He steps back slowly, hands open, surrender. "I will not hurt you," he says, and the promise is not loud, but it is absolute. She studies his face, searching for the monster she remembers and finding something else. Something uncertain, something human. The door opens again and a cook shouts her name, and she pushes off the wall with visible effort. gathering herself piece by piece. She does not look at him when she speaks again. This conversation never happened. Go back to your table, enjoy your victory, and leave me out of it. Then she disappears inside, and the door slams shut, leaving him alone in the alley with the taste of rust in his mouth and a single unbearable truth echoing in his head. He conquered the city and still managed to lose the only person who ever looked at him without fear. He does not return to the restaurant floor. He leaves through the back alley, and the city swallows him whole. But it does not feel like victory anymore. It feels like accusation, every light a witness, every shadow whispering her name, even though he refuses to think it. He gets into the car, and for the first time in years, he does not give an order. The driver waits, and the silence stretches until it becomes unbearable. "Take me to the office," he finally says, and his voice sounds older, heavier. The building greets him with the usual deference, doors opening, guards nodding, heads lowered. But tonight the ritual feels hollow. He walks into his private floor, and the world rearranges itself around him, screens lighting up, assistants standing straight, men pretending not to notice the storm inside him. He calls for his intelligence chief with a single gesture, and the room empties in seconds. When the door closes, the air changes. This is the part of his empire that does not exist on paper. The part built from secrets and quiet violence. "Find everything about her," he says, and the order lands like a blade on the desk between them. Every job, every address, every doctor, every man who has touched her life since she left. The chief does not ask why, because men who survive in this world do not question motives, they execute them. The network moves instantly. Phones ringing, databases opening, informants waking in the middle of the night without knowing whose name they are whispering. And he sits alone watching the city through bulletproof glass, while the machine he built hunts through her past. Minutes stretch into hours, and when the file arrives it is thicker than he expected, heavier. He opens it, and the truth spills out in cold ink. Eviction notices, temporary jobs, termination letters. Fired when pregnancy became visible, rejected applications, schools that would not take her back because absence makes women disposable. Medical reports stamped with public clinic logos, anemia, high blood pressure, warnings about stress. His jaw tightens with every page because this is what exile looks like in real numbers. This is the cost of his decision, measured in sleepless nights and cheap meals. Then he finds the name of the father, and the room grows smaller. The man is tied to a rival faction, an architect laundering money through construction fronts, married with 2 children, a double life stitched together with cowardice. The timeline is precise: 8 months after the divorce, promises, engagement, pregnancy, then exposure, the wife appearing at the door like a verdict. He imagines her standing there carrying hope in her hands, only to watch it collapse, and something inside him turns dark and sharp. The file continues, statements from witnesses, hush money offered, refused, threats, implied silence, chosen. She chose dignity over safety again and again, and each choice cut her deeper. At the bottom of the medical record there is a single line that stops him completely: emergency contact, name and number, his name, his office. He reads it once, twice, a third time, as if it might change. She wrote him down as the person to call if she was dying, and the weight of that trust crushes his lungs. After everything he said, after the cruelty, after the exile, she still believed he would come if it mattered. He closes the file slowly, and the city outside feels distant, unreal. He could kill the man responsible with a phone call, erase him from maps and memory, and part of him wants to. Violence is easy, it is language he speaks fluently. But the harder war is inside him, because revenge will not rebuild what he broke, protection might. He leans back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since he took power he feels afraid. Not of enemies, not of betrayal, but of failing her again. The intelligence chief waits silently across the desk and finally asks what should be done. He looks at the file, then at the city, then back at the man, and his voice is steady when he answers. "No war, not yet. We protect her quietly. No one touches her. No one speaks her name. She moves through this city like she has an army behind her even if she never sees it. The order is given and the machine shifts direction. And as the chief leaves, he realizes the consolidation he celebrated tonight was meaningless compared to this decision. Because, for the first time, his empire is not moving to expand power. It is moving to guard a single pregnant woman who once loved him. And the thought terrifies him more than any battlefield ever has. He returns the next night without an entourage, without the armored car, without the spectacle that usually announces his presence. He leaves the symbols of power behind because he understands that every layer of armor between them is another reason for her to run. He walks into the restaurant dressed like an ordinary man, but the room still reacts to him in ways he cannot hide. Authority clings to him like a scent that never washes off. He chooses a table in her section deliberately, and the act feels like stepping into a battlefield where the weapon is memory instead of steel. When she sees him across the room, her body stiffens before her face does. He watches the panic ripple through her, and he hates himself for being the source of it. She finishes serving another table with hands that shake only slightly, and then she approaches him like someone walking toward a storm she cannot outrun. "Good evening, sir." Her voice is perfectly professional, and the distance in it is colder than any threat he has ever received. He looks up at her, and the words he practiced dissolve because the reality of her standing there again is too heavy. "I need to talk to you," he says quietly, and her eyes flick toward the manager's office, toward the other waiters, toward the exits, calculating risk the way prey calculates escape routes. "I am working," she replies, and the emphasis is not about the job, it is about survival. He nods, and for the first time in his life he obeys a boundary without negotiation. "Order first, then," he says, and she takes his request mechanically, writing it down without looking at him. The silence between them is louder than the music. When she brings the drink, he speaks again, but softer this time. "I know about the man," and the word man tastes like poison in his mouth. Her hand freezes mid-motion, and for a second he sees naked fear in her eyes. "You do not get to talk about him here," she whispers, and the plea is raw because the restaurant is not just a workplace, it is the fragile wall between her and collapse. "I am not here to shame you," he says quickly. "I am here because I should have been there long before he ever existed." The sentence lands between them, and she studies him, as if trying to recognize a stranger wearing a familiar face. "You do not get to rewrite history," she says, after a moment, and her voice is steady but wounded. "You left and I survived. That is the only truth that matters." "I am not trying to rewrite it," he answers. "I am trying to live with it." The confession surprises them both because it is not a command, not a negotiation, it is an admission of guilt spoken in a room full of strangers. She looks away first because hearing remorse from him is more dangerous than hearing cruelty. Cruelty is predictable, remorse invites hope, and hope is what destroyed her last time. "What do you want?" she asks finally, and the question is small, but it carries the weight of every broken promise between them. "I want to help you," he says, and immediately sees the wall rise again in her posture. "Not with money," he adds quickly, "not with power, not with the things that ruined us. I want to be there." The simplicity of it sounds absurd even to him because men like him do not offer presents, they offer solutions. She laughs under her breath, and the sound is tired. "Men like you do not know how to be there, they only know how to take over." "Then teach me," he says, and the words come out before pride can stop them. "Teach me how to stand next to you without owning you." The silence that follows is electric, and he can feel every pair of eyes in the restaurant turning toward their table, sensing tension they cannot name. Her gaze returns to him, and for the first time since he walked in there is something other than fear in it. There is doubt, and doubt is the beginning of a crack in the armor she built around herself. "If you step into this," she says slowly, "you do not get to leave when it becomes inconvenient. You do not get to disappear when the baby cries, or when I am angry, or when reality is not romantic. If you stay all the way. He nods without hesitation, because the decision was made the moment he read his name on her emergency contact form. I am not asking for a night, he tells her. I am asking for a lifetime to make up for the one I broke. The words hang between them, fragile and terrifying, and she closes her eyes for a heartbeat, as if bracing against impact. When she opens them again, she looks older and younger at the same time. I can give you a dinner, she says, nothing more. Just a dinner and a conversation. And to him, it feels like the first victory that has ever mattered, because it is not taken by force, it is given by choice. She turns away to serve another table, and he sits there shaking slightly, realizing that this negotiation is the most dangerous one he has ever entered, because the enemy is not a rival family or a traitor. The enemy is the man he used to be, and for the first time he is not sure he will survive the fight unchanged. The dinner happens in a place so ordinary it feels like another country to him. A small family restaurant where the tables wobble and the air smells of garlic and warm bread instead of perfume and polished money. She chose it deliberately, and he understands why the moment he steps inside. There is nowhere here for power to hide. No velvet corners or private rooms. Just people eating and laughing and living without fear of being watched. She walks slower now, and he matches her pace without thinking. Every instinct that once pushed him forward now bends toward her rhythm. When they sit across from each other, the table feels like a border between two worlds, and he realizes he does not know how to cross it without breaking something. She orders water and cheap pasta, and he does the same without looking at the price. The waiter treats them like any other couple, and the simplicity of that almost hurts. No one here knows he owns half the city's shadows. No one cares. And for a moment he feels small in a way that is strangely peaceful. She watches him carefully, as if expecting him to flinch at the normalcy. You do not have to pretend, she says quietly. I am not pretending, he answers, and the truth surprises him because he is not. He is relieved to sit in a place where his name carries no weight. The silence stretches, and he knows she is waiting for him to speak first. I read your file, he admits, and the words land heavy. Her shoulders tense and the old anger flickers in her eyes. Of course you did, she says, because men like you never ask, they investigate. He accepts the accusation without defense because it is deserved. I needed to know how badly I failed you, he says, and the simplicity of it steals the edge from her response. She looks down at her hands resting on her stomach, and for a second he sees the exhaustion she carries like a second spine. Survival is not a failure, she murmurs, it is just survival. He leans forward, and the urge to reach for her is almost unbearable, but he keeps his hands still because trust is a fragile animal, and he has hunted it before. I do not want to rescue you, he tells her. I want to stand next to you while you rescue yourself. The distinction is small, but it matters, and he sees it land in her eyes. The baby shifts, and she inhales sharply, and instinct finally wins. His hand moves, and this time she does not pull away. His palm rests lightly against the curve of her stomach, and the movement beneath his fingers is a shock that tears the breath from his chest. Life presses back against him, warm and undeniable, and something inside him cracks open. That is your son, she whispers, and the word son hits him harder than any title he has ever carried. Not by blood, he says automatically, and she shakes her head. Blood is the smallest part of fatherhood. Presence is what matters. The child kicks again, as if answering, and he feels fear and wonder twist together in his throat. I do not know how to be this man, he admits, and the confession feels like stepping off a cliff. She studies his face, searching for arrogance and finding none. No one knows how, she says. You learn because you have to. The restaurant noise fades into a soft blur, and the world narrows to the space between their hands and the tiny life moving there. For the first time he is terrified of the future, not because of enemies or betrayal, but because he wants it. He wants the sleepless nights and the crying and the chaos. He wants the ordinary moments he once called weakness. I am afraid, he says, and she almost smiles. Good, she answers, because fear means you understand how much this matters. The waiter brings their food, and neither of them eats right away. They sit there holding onto the same fragile miracle, and he realizes this is the smallest table he has ever sat at, and the largest decision of his life is unfolding on it. The empire he built feels distant, irrelevant compared to the quiet gravity of her breathing and the steady pulse beneath his hand. And in that ordinary restaurant surrounded by strangers who will never know his name, he understands that power was never the thing that kept him alive. This fragile, terrifying hope that he might still become the man she needs before time runs out, and the child enters a world that will measure him not by fear, but by love. The threat arrives wrapped in silence, the way all serious threats do, not with shouting or broken doors, but with a message that slips through his security like a needle through cloth. A photograph placed on his desk before sunrise showing her leaving the clinic the previous afternoon, her hand resting on her stomach, unaware she is being watched. The angle is distant, professional, taken by someone who understands surveillance. His blood turns cold in a way violence never managed, because this is not about him, this is about her, and the child and the fragile world he is trying to build around them. The room seems to tilt as he studies the image and sees a shadow in the reflection of a window, a man he recognizes from the rival faction connected to the father. Not the coward himself, but someone loyal to him, someone sent to measure risk. And the meaning is unmistakable. They know she is tied to him again, and they are testing how much she matters. His first instinct is annihilation, the old language roaring back to life inside his chest. Wipe them out, burn the faction to the ground, make an example so brutal no one ever looks in her direction again. His hand tightens on the edge of the desk, and the wood groans under the pressure. But then he sees her face, in his mind the fear in her eyes when he raised his voice in the restaurant, the way she flinched when he moved too fast, and he understands that if he answers this with blood, he drags her back into the world she fought to escape. Protection cannot look like war this time. He calls his intelligence chief, and the order he gives is colder than anger. Relocate her quietly, he says. No panic, no spectacle. She thinks it is a favor from the clinic or a scheduling change, nothing that points to me. The machine moves instantly. Safe houses prepared, routes cleared, guards placed in civilian clothes. He drives to her apartment himself, ignoring the protests of his security, because this part he will not delegate. When she opens the door and sees his face, she knows something is wrong before he speaks. The air around him is too still, too controlled. What happened, she asks, and he steps inside, closing the door behind him, as if the hallway itself is listening. We need to move you for a few days, he says, and the words taste like betrayal because they sound like commands from the man he promised not to be. Her eyes flash with anger and fear tangled together. I am not running again, she says. I am done living in hiding. He forces himself to breathe slowly, because if he pushes, she will bolt and he will lose her trust forever. This is not hiding, he tells her. It is a precaution. Someone connected to the man who hurt you is asking questions, and I will not gamble with your safety. The silence that follows is sharp and heavy. She studies his face, searching for exaggeration, and finds none. You would go to war over this, she whispers, and the truth is, yes, he would burn the city down if it meant she slept safely, but he does not say it. Instead, he takes her hands gently and lets her feel the tremor he cannot hide. I am trying not to, he admits, because war would put you in the middle, and I will not make you a battlefield again. The honesty disarms her more than any argument. Her shoulders sag, and he sees how tired she is of being strong alone. The baby shifts and she winces, and instinct overrides pride again. Fine, she says softly, but only if you promise me something. Anything, he answers without hesitation. Promise me you will not kill anyone over me. The request lands like a blade, because violence is the currency he knows best. It is how he solves problems, how he breathes, and she is asking him to survive without oxygen. He holds her gaze and understands this is the real test, not power, not revenge, but restraint. I promise, he says, and the words feel heavier than any oath he has sworn in blood. I will protect you without turning the city into a graveyard. She nods, once accepting the bargain, and begins packing with shaking hands. He watches her move through the small apartment, gathering pieces of her life, and the enormity of what is at stake settles into his bones. This is no longer about pride or territory. This is about choosing the man he wants to be every second he stays with her. When they leave the building, his men are invisible, but present shadows guarding shadows, and he feels the old instincts clawing at him, demanding retaliation. But he keeps his hands open, keeps his voice calm, keeps the war inside his chest locked behind his ribs. Because, for the first time, the most powerful act he can commit is not destruction, it is control. And as he guides her into the car and feels her lean against him, trusting him to carry her through the storm, he understands that this quiet promise not to kill is the most violent transformation he has ever attempted. And if he fails, he does not just lose a battle, he loses the family he is fighting to build. The blackout hits just after midnight, and the city falls into a darkness so complete it feels deliberate, as if someone reached down and smothered every light at once. The safe house windows turn into black mirrors, and for a moment there is only silence before the sirens begin in the distance, long wounded sounds that roll through the streets like a warning. She is already awake when the power dies, sitting upright in bed, breathing too fast, one hand gripping the sheets, the other clutching her stomach. He feels the fear before he understands the reason, and then her voice cuts through the dark, thin and shaking. It is happening. The words steal the air from the room. Another contraction hits her, and her body folds forward with a gasp, and the sound is raw animal pain that tears straight through his chest. This is not a threat he can shoot or negotiate. This is biology declaring war on his illusion of control. He scrambles for the emergency, lights his men installed, and the room floods with dim battery glow, revealing sweat on her skin, eyes wide with terror and determination. How long, he asks, forcing calm into his voice, because if he panics she will drown in it. Minutes, she whispers, I tried to wait, I did not want to wake you. The city outside roars with distant chaos, gunfire. Somewhere far away, engines screaming, the rival faction taking advantage of the blackout to settle scores. And the irony is brutal, the world he knows burning, while a new one demands to be born in his hands. He lifts her carefully, and every step toward the door feels like walking across a fault line. His security team moves instantly, shadows materializing with weapons drawn, but their eyes soften when they see her clutching him, contractions tearing through her body. The car ride is a blur of red emergency lights and empty streets. He drives himself, ignoring shouted warnings, because this is not a moment he will surrender to anyone else. She crushes his hand with every wave of pain, and he welcomes it because it is proof she is still here, still fighting. Breathe with me, he says over and over, and the words are a lifeline thrown into a storm he cannot enter for her. The hospital is running on backup power, hallways glowing in sickly yellow light, doctors moving with frantic precision. And when they take her from his arms, the separation feels like being skinned alive. He follows anyway, refusing to stay outside the curtain, refusing to be a spectator in the birth of the child he already calls his son in his mind. Hours collapse into a single endless moment of her screaming and pushing and refusing to break, and he stays at her side, counting breaths, whispering promises he does not remember forming. You are not alone, I am here, I am not leaving. The words become a rhythm that anchors them both. At 11:47 in the morning, the doctor shouts that the head is visible, and the world narrows to a single impossible miracle, a small dark crown emerging from pain. His knees nearly give out at the sight, because this is creation, raw and merciless and beautiful. One more push, they say, and she screams with a force that shakes him to his core. and then the room fills with a cry so pure it cuts through every memory of violence he carries. The child is lifted into the air slick and furious and alive, and he is sobbing before he realizes the sound is coming from him. They place scissors in his trembling hand and call him father, and the word detonates inside his chest. He cuts the cord and feels the final thread snap, not just between mother and child, but between the man he was and the one he is becoming. When they lay the baby in his arms, the weight is almost nothing, and yet it anchors him to the earth. Tiny fingers wrap around his thumb, and the grip is absolute. And in that instant the wars, the power, the empire all fall silent. There is only this fragile heartbeat trusting him completely. "Hello," he whispers through tears, "I am your father, and I will never abandon you." She watches from the bed, exhausted, radiant, smiling through tears of her own. And the blackout outside no longer matters, the gunfire. No longer matters, the city can burn and rebuild 1,000 times. But in this small room under flickering emergency lights, a family has been born, and the most feared man in the city is shaking, because he has finally met something stronger than fear, something he cannot dominate, only protect and love. And the realization is so overwhelming, he bows his head over the child and lets the storm inside him break into quiet, grateful tears. The council summons him 3 nights after the birth, and the timing is not accidental because power never waits for joy to settle. He leaves the hospital with the smell of antiseptic still clinging to his clothes and the echo of his son's breathing in his ears. The meeting room is buried beneath the city, in a chamber carved from concrete and secrecy, where men have decided wars with quieter voices than lovers use in bed. They are already seated when he enters, and the air is heavy with expectation. No one congratulates him, no one smiles, because this is not a gathering for celebration, this is judgment wrapped in tradition. The oldest of them leans forward, hands folded, and speaks the first blow without raising his tone. "We hear you have claimed a child not of your blood." The sentence hangs in the room like a verdict. He feels the old instinct to dominate, to silence them with fear. But the image of the baby asleep against his chest steadies him, and he answers without aggression, "I have claimed my son." The correction is deliberate, and it lands like a challenge. Murmurs ripple around the table, and another voice joins the attack, colder, sharper. Sentiment weakens rulers, and weak rulers invite predators. You are tying your name to a vulnerability. The words are meant to provoke shame, but instead they ignite something fierce and calm inside him. He stands slowly, and the movement alone quiets the room because they remember what he is capable of. For years he ruled them through terror and efficiency, but tonight his authority comes from a different place. "You mistake love for weakness," he says, and his voice carries a weight none of them expected. "I ruled this city through fear, and it bought us territory, money, obedience. But it did not buy loyalty. Loyalty is built when men believe in something greater than survival." He looks at each of them in turn, letting the silence press his meaning into their bones. "That child is not a liability," he continues, "he is a declaration that we are not animals tearing at scraps in the dark. We are men capable of choosing what we protect." One of the younger members slams a hand on the table, unable to contain his frustration. "Rivals will see this as softness. They will test you. They will come for him. And the threat is naked now, the unspoken fear of chaos creeping in through the cracks of emotion." His gaze sharpens and the temperature in the room drops. "Let them come," he answers, and the promise in his tone is absolute. "Anyone who touches my family signs his own death warrant." The council falls silent because they believe that part without hesitation, but he does not stop there. He leans forward, and his next words reshape the ground beneath them. "The difference is, I will not burn the city to prove a point. We evolve, or we die choking on the same violence that built us." Power is not measured by how much blood we spill, it is measured by what survives under our protection. The oldest man studies him for a long moment, and something like respect flickers in his tired eyes. "You are asking us to change the code," he says quietly. I am telling you the code already changed, he replies and gestures upward, as if pointing to the world above their bunker. The city is watching, waiting for the next monster to rise. I am done feeding it monsters. I will rule as a father first and a don second, and if any man here believes that makes me unfit to lead, he is welcome to stand and try to remove me. The challenge detonates in the room and no one moves. Not because they are cowards, but because they see the truth in his stance. This is not softness, this is steel reforged into something sharper. Minutes stretch, and the silence becomes an agreement spoken without words. The oldest man nods once, and the others follow one by one, the decision settling like dust after an explosion. The council accepts the child not out of kindness, but because they understand the man in front of them is more dangerous now, that he has something to lose. When he leaves the chamber, the weight in his chest lifts, and he steps into the night air, feeling the city breathe around him. He returns to the hospital just before dawn and finds her asleep with the baby curled against her heartbeat. He sits beside them, watching the rise and fall of their breathing, and realizes he did not just defend his son tonight, he redefined his empire. The wars will continue, the shadows will never vanish, but inside this small circle of light, he has drawn a boundary the world cannot cross. And as the child stirs and grips his finger with impossible strength, he understands that legacy is not written in territory or fear, it is written in the lives he chooses to guard. And for the first time, the title he carries feels less important than the simple word forming quietly in his chest: Father. 6 months pass, and the city does not fall apart without him the way he once believed it would. The empire continues to breathe through men he trained to carry weight without constant supervision. And he learns a rhythm that has nothing to do with power and everything to do with small, fragile routines. Midnight bottles warm in his hands. The soft animal sounds his son makes when dreaming. The way her breathing changes when she finally falls into deep sleep after a day of exhaustion. The house is quiet tonight, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Toys scattered across the floor like evidence of joy. A lamp glowing softly in the corner. And he sits on the couch with the child asleep against his chest, afraid to move because this moment feels sacred. The boy's fingers twitch in sleep, still gripping his shirt, as if testing the promise that he is there, always there. And the weight of that trust humbles him more than any threat ever has. She appears in the doorway, watching them with a softness that still surprises him. Paint stains on her hands from the part-time work she returned to. Life slowly rebuilding around them in ways that do not require permission from his world. She sits beside him and leans her head on his shoulder. And for a while neither of them speaks because the silence is full, not empty. Finally, she whispers something that cracks the night open. I almost left the city the night you saw me in the restaurant. The words land gently, but they carry a ghost. He turns his head, slightly afraid to disturb the child, and searches her face. I packed a bag, she continues. I was going to disappear. Before the pregnancy showed too much, I thought it would be easier to start somewhere no one knew me. The image hits him like a delayed explosion, her walking into another darkness alone, carrying a child and a broken heart. What stopped you, he asks, and his voice is barely sound. She smiles faintly and looks at their son. Stubborn hope. I think I kept believing that if the world knocked me down enough times, eventually something would push back in my favor. He exhales slowly because he knows the truth that sits unspoken between them. He almost walked away that night too. He sees it clearly now, the version of himself frozen at the table, choosing silence, choosing safety, choosing emptiness. For 2 seconds he confesses, I told myself, it was not my problem anymore, that you were a stranger and I should stay seated. Her eyes lift to him, and there is no anger there, only a deep understanding. What changed, she asks softly, though she already knows. You held your back because it hurt, he says, and the memory tightens his throat. I saw you trying to stand, and I realized if I stayed seated I would spend the rest of my life pretending I was not already dead. The truth settles over them, warm and heavy. She reaches for his hand and threads her fingers through his without waking the child. Staying is harder than leaving, she murmurs, but it is the only thing that builds anything real. He nods because every day since has been proof of that. The Empire still calls to him, the shadows still whisper solutions written in blood, but each night he returns here and the noise fades. He looks down at the boy sleeping against him and feels a fierce, quiet certainty anchor in his bones. This is the war that matters, the war to remain gentle in a violent world, the war to wake up and choose them again and again. The child stirs and sighs and settles deeper into his chest, and he understands that love is not a dramatic declaration or a victory speech. It is this repeated act of staying when leaving would be easier. The city outside continues its endless motion, sirens, distant laughter rising from late-night streets, power trading hands in dark rooms. But inside this house, there is a different law. Here survival is measured in tenderness. Here strength is the ability to be present. He presses his lips to the top of his son's head and whispers a promise he does not need witnesses to hear. I am not going anywhere. And as she closes her eyes beside him, trusting that vow completely, he realizes the final shocking truth that would terrify the man he used to be. He is happier guarding this small, fragile piece than he ever was ruling the entire city. And for the first time, the future does not look like a battlefield or a throne. It looks like tomorrow morning sunlight spilling across this room and the sound of his child laughing. And that is enough to make the most feared man in the city feel safe.